The entire town of Pinewood Ridge held its breath when Evelyn Marlowe stepped off the afternoon stage. Not because she was beautiful, though she was, in a quiet, dignified way, but because everyone knew where she was headed. Up the mountain, to the scarred man's cabin. To marry a monster, they whispered. She carried one carpet bag and her mother's Bible. She didn't look back. But that was the end of the story. The beginning happened 3 weeks earlier, in a cramped boarding house in St. Louis, where Evelyn sat across from a lawyer who wouldn't meet her eyes. Miss Marlowe, I'm afraid the estate is entirely consumed by your late father's debts. Mr. Garretson shuffled papers with apologetic efficiency. The creditors have already seized the house. You have until Friday. Evelyn's hands lay perfectly still in her lap. 28 years old. No husband. No inheritance. No prospects. Her father had been a gentleman, a scholar, and apparently a catastrophic gambler. I understand, she said quietly. She had $63, a teaching certificate from a women's academy that had since closed, and a spine her mother always said was forged from railroad iron. That evening, she sat in her rented room with the newspaper spread across the narrow bed. Her finger moved down the columns. Seamstress wanted. Live-in housekeeper. Companion to invalid widow. Then her eyes caught a different kind of notice, tucked in the back pages among the livestock auctions. Correspondence sought. Landowner, 34, Colorado Territory. Extensive property. Seeks educated woman of good character for marriage. Must be willing to live remote. No idle romantics. Honesty required above all else. Respond to Mr. J. Thorne, care of Pinewood Ridge Post Office. Something about the bluntness appealed to her. No flowery promises. No false poetry. Just a transaction between two people who needed something from each other. She wrote her letter that night by candlelight. She was honest about her circumstances. No money, no family, no illusions. But she could read Latin and Greek, manage a household on nothing, teach children, keep books, and she didn't scare easily. His reply came faster than she expected. The handwriting was strong, angular, almost aggressive. Miss Marlowe, I will be plain. I am not what women hope for. I was caught in a timber fire 5 years ago. My face and hands bear the marks. I do not go to town. I do not attend socials. If you can accept this, I can offer you security, respect, and a home that will never be taken from you. I will not lie to you, and I ask the same in return. If you come, come freely. If you cannot bear the sight of me, I will pay your return fare with no judgment. She read it 3 times. Then she wrote back, Mr. Thorne, I have been measured by drawing rooms and found wanting my entire life. I do not scare easily, and I do not break my word. If you will have me, I will come. 2 weeks later, she sold everything she owned except her mother's Bible and one good dress. She bought a ticket west. The stage from Denver to Pinewood Ridge took 2 brutal days across high passes and rutted trails. When they finally rolled into the mountain town, Evelyn stepped down onto the muddy main street with her carpet bag and her dignity intact. The postmaster, a barrel-chested man named Craddock, looked her up and down with undisguised pity. You the woman writing to Thorne? I am. He shook his head slowly. Ma'am, I don't know what he told you in those letters, but you should know. That man don't come down off his mountain. Ain't been seen in town in near 5 years. Folks say he looks like something dragged out of hell. Then it's fortunate I didn't come here to judge his appearance, Evelyn said crisply. A woman in a calico dress leaned out of the general store. Honey, no woman will have him. That's why he had to send away for somebody who didn't know better. You get back on that stage. There's still time. Evelyn met her eyes. I made a promise. I intend to keep it. Craddock sighed. Thorne sent word he'd meet you at the north trailhead, 2 miles up the ridge road. You sure about this? Quite sure. She walked alone up the narrow mountain road, her bag growing heavier with each step. The pines closed in, dense and whispering. The air smelled of resin and cold water. At the trailhead, a man waited beside a sturdy wagon hitched to 2 calm draft horses. He stood in shadow, hat pulled low, a canvas duster covering him from neck to boots. He didn't move as she approached. Evelyn stopped 10 feet away. Her heart hammered, but her voice was steady. Mr. Thorne? Miss Marlowe. His voice was deep, rough-edged, but not unkind. You came. I said I would. He hesitated. Then slowly he removed his hat. The left side of his face was a landscape of scars, angry red tissue that twisted from his jaw to his temple, pulling the corner of his mouth slightly downward. His left hand, resting on the wagon rail, was similarly marked, the skin tight and shiny. But his eyes were clear gray, steady and intelligent, and filled with a vulnerability that broke something open in her chest. "Now you've seen," he said quietly. "The wagon will take you back to town if you asked." Evelyn looked at him. Really looked. She saw the scars, yes. But she also saw the strong shoulders, the carefully mended clothes, the gentle way he studied the horses. She saw a man who had survived something terrible and built a life anyway. She walked forward and held out her hand. "I don't break my word, Mr. Thorne. Shall we go home?" His scarred hand closed carefully around hers. And for the first time in 5 years, Jonas Thorne smiled. The cabin wasn't what Evelyn expected. She'd braced herself for squalor, a lonely man's neglect. But what she found as the wagon crested the final ridge took her breath away for entirely different reasons. The house was large, solid, built from massive logs with a stone chimney rising from a steep pitched roof. A wide porch wrapped around the front, and beyond it, a valley opened like a secret. Meadows golden in the late light, a silver creek cutting through, and forest climbing the far slopes in dark ways. "You built this?" she asked. Jonas nodded, not looking at her. "Took 2 years. Gave me something to do besides feel sorry for myself." He helped her down from the wagon with careful formality, as if afraid to touch her too long. Inside, the cabin was clean, almost obsessively so. Wooden floors scrubbed pale, shelves lined with books, a stone hearth large enough to stand in, curtains at the windows. "There's a room for you upstairs," Jonas said, setting her bed down. "Door has a latch. I sleep down here." "I won't. I know this is just an arrangement." "I won't expect, Mr. Thorne," Evelyn interrupted gently. "We are married, or we will be, properly, when the circuit preacher comes through next month. Until then, I am content with whatever arrangement makes you comfortable." He looked at her then, really looked, as if trying to understand what species of woman would speak so plainly. "Why did you come?" he asked suddenly. "A woman like you, educated, well-spoken, you could have found something else." "Could I?" Evelyn set her mother's Bible on the table. "I was 3 days from being turned into the street, Mr. Thorne. But more than that, I was tired of being measured by standards I could never meet. Too old, too plain, too educated. You offered me honesty. That is rarer than you might think." Something shifted in his expression. Not quite trust, but the beginning of it. Over the next days, they moved around each other like cautious dancers learning a new pattern. Jonas was up before dawn, tending stock. She discovered he had a small herd of cattle, 24 sheep, chickens, and a smokehouse full of venison and trout. He was meticulous, efficient, and clearly accustomed to doing everything alone. Evelyn took over the kitchen, the mending, the endless small tasks that made a house a home. She discovered Jonas had been living on game meat, beans, and coffee. She made bread from the flour stores, coaxed the root cellar into yielding potatoes and onions, and created meals that made him stop and stare at his plate. "I've forgotten food could taste like this," he said one evening. "You'd forgotten what it's like to have someone care whether you eat well," Evelyn corrected. He looked up, startled, and she saw the loneliness in him, a wound deeper than the scars. They began to talk in the evenings. Jonas was not unlettered. His shelves held Virgil, Shakespeare, agricultural treatises, and engineering manuals. He had been a foreman at a timber operation before the fire, managing crews and mill operations. "I was going to expand," he said one night, staring into the fire. "Build a proper mill here on the creek. Process lumber, maybe supply the new railroad spur." Then the fire happened. By the time I could walk again, I couldn't stand people staring. "So you hid," Evelyn said. His jaw tightened. "I survived." "Yes," she agreed. "You did. But surviving and living are not the same thing." He stood abruptly, the walls going up again. "You've been here a week. You don't know anything about it." "You're right," Evelyn said calmly. "I don't know what you survived, but I know what it looks like when someone stops hoping for anything better." He left the cabin, the door closing hard behind him. Evelyn sat alone by the fire, her hands folded, and wondered if she had pushed too far. He didn't come in until well after midnight. She heard his boots on the porch, the creak of the door. She stayed in her room, giving him space. In the morning, she found wildflowers in a tin cup on the kitchen table. The thaw came slowly. Jonas began to linger over breakfast, instead of bolting his food and disappearing. He showed her the property lines, the places where the creek ran best, the stand of old-growth pine he'd been carefully managing. "If I could get the timber to market," he said, standing among the giants, "this land could support a dozen families. But I'd need a mill, equipment, men willing to work for someone they're afraid to look at. Then we'll build it," Evelyn said. He turned to her, disbelieving. I can keep books, write contracts, manage correspondence." She looked up at the towering pines. "You have the skill and the land. I have organizational abilities that are currently being wasted on making soup. Together, we have a business." For the first time, she saw something kindle in him. Not hope, quite, but possibility. That night, they spread his old mill plans across the table. Jonas sketched elevations, water flow, board feet calculations. Evelyn made lists, equipment needed, supply costs, potential customers. "The railroad's expanding through Blackthorn Canyon," she said. "They'll need bridge timbers, rail ties, mine supports. If we can deliver quality lumber at fair prices, they'd have to deal with me." Jonas said flatly. "No." Evelyn looked up. "They'd have to deal with us. And I am very good at making men with money believe they're getting exactly what they want." A slow smile spread across his scarred face. "Miss Marlowe, I think I may have gotten far more than I bargained for." "Mrs. Thorne," she corrected softly. "And yes, you did." Their eyes met across the scattered papers, and something unspoken passed between them. A recognition, a partnership taking root. Outside, the first snow of autumn began to fall, dusting the pines in white. Inside, two people who had been told they were unwanted began to build something neither had dared imagine. But the town wasn't done with them yet. The circuit preacher arrived in early October, a jovial man named Reverend Cook who thought nothing of climbing mountains to serve his scattered flock. He married them properly in the cabin's front room, with 2 ranch hands Jonas had cautiously hired as witnesses. "Well, son," Reverend Cook said afterward, pumping Jonas's hand, "you've got yourself a fine woman. Don't let the world tell you otherwise." Jonas looked at Evelyn, and for the first time in years, he felt something like pride. But their plans for the mill required capital, supplies, and contracts, which meant Jonas would have to go to town. The night before their planned trip, he stood on the porch, gripping the rail with white knuckles. "I haven't been down there in 5 years," he said. Evelyn came to stand beside him. "Then it's time. They'll stare. Yes. They'll pity me. Or worse. Probably." She looked up at him. "Jonas, I cannot make them see what I see. But I can stand beside you and dare them to speak their cruelty aloud." He looked down at her. This woman who had walked up a mountain to marry a stranger, who had taken his half-formed dreams and made them real, who looked at his scars and never once flinched. "Why don't you flinch?" he asked suddenly. "Everyone else does." Evelyn was quiet for a moment. "My mother died when I was 12. Consumption. By the end, she was so thin, so ravaged by the disease, people couldn't bear to look at her. I sat with her every day, and she told me, 'Evelyn, the world will try to teach you that only beautiful things have value. Don't you believe it? The most valuable things are the ones that survive the fire.'" She took his scarred hand in both of hers. "You survived the fire, Jonas. That's all I see." He pulled her close then, wrapping his arms around her, and let himself believe, for the first time, that he was not alone. They rode into Pinewood Ridge the next morning, side by side on the wagon bench. The town went quiet as they rolled down the main street. People stopped mid-sentence. A woman hustled her children inside. The blacksmith stood frozen, hammer raised. Jonas's jaw was set like stone, but he kept his eyes forward. They stopped in front of the mercantile. Evelyn climbed down first, smoothing her skirts, then turned and waited. Jonas stepped down, removed his hat, and walked beside his wife through the door. The proprietor, a thin man named Stillwell, stared openly. Evelyn placed her list on the counter. "We need milling equipment. I have specifications." Stillwell dragged his eyes from Jonas to the paper. This is considerable material, Mrs. Thorne. My husband is opening a lumber operation. We'll need regular supplies. Can you provide them? Or should we take our business to Blackthorn?" The magic words, regular business. Stillwell's demeanor shifted instantly. No, we can certainly accommodate you, Mrs. Thorne." He glanced at Jonas. "Mr. Thorne, I'd heard you'd taken up residence in the high country. Didn't know you were planning enterprise. Plans change, Jonas said quietly. Over the next hour, they visited the freight office, the land office, and the bank. At each stop, Evelyn's calm competence and Jonas's detailed knowledge made it clear this was not charity case or fool's errand. This was business. By noon, they had letters of intent, supply agreements, and a meeting scheduled with the railroad's timber contractor. They were leaving the land office when they encountered Craddock, the postmaster, and the woman in calico who had warned Evelyn away. The woman stared at them, then at Evelyn. "Well, you're still here." "I am," Evelyn said pleasantly. "And you're not." She gestured vaguely at Jonas. "Repulsed? Terrified? Regretting my choices?" Evelyn's voice remained gentle, but steel ran underneath. "No, I am building a life with my husband. A good life. I'm quite content." Craddock cleared his throat. "Thorne, there's talk you're hiring for a mill crew." Jonas tensed. "I am." "What?" "My nephew's looking for work. Strong back, willing learner. If you're paying fair wages." "I am." "Then send him up. I'll vouch for his character." It was a small thing, a crack in the wall, but it mattered. By spring, the mill was operational. Jonas had hired 6 men, young, desperate, or simply practical enough to care more about steady pay than their employer's appearance. Evelyn managed the accounts, the contracts, the endless correspondence. The timber was first-rate. The railroad contractor placed a standing order. Within a year, Thorne Lumber was the primary supplier for 3 counties. Jonas began going to town monthly. People grew accustomed. Some still stared. But when a man provides jobs and pays his debts, even prejudice bends to practicality. 2 years after Evelyn stepped off the stage, the cabin had grown. A new wing, a proper office, a bedroom upstairs with windows overlooking the valley. One evening in late summer, Jonas came in to find Evelyn at the desk, frowning over a letter. "What is it?" he asked. She looked up, and there were tears on her cheeks, but she was smiling. "It's from Reverend Cook. There's a family in Blackthorn, widow with 4 children. Her husband died in a mine collapse. She's about to lose her home." Evelyn's voice shook. "I want to help her, Jonas. I want to offer her a job here, managing the boarding house we talked about building for the mill crew." Jonas knelt beside her chair. "Then we'll do it. You don't mind, Evelyn?" He took her face gently in his scarred hands. "You saw past what everyone else called ruin and found something worth building. How could I mind you offering that same grace to someone else?" She kissed him then, not with pity or duty, but with the fierce, whole love of a woman who had found her match. That autumn, they built the boarding house. The widow, Mrs. Brennan, arrived with her children and wept when she saw it. Thorne Lumber became known not just for quality timber, but for fair dealing and second chances. Jonas hired men others wouldn't. Evelyn taught the workers' children reading and figures in the evenings. The town that had whispered, "No woman will have you," watched in grudging amazement as the scarred man and the spinster nobody wanted built an empire of second chances. And on quiet evenings, when the mill was silent and the valley lay peaceful under stars, Jonas would take Evelyn's hand and say what he'd said 100 times and would say 1,000 more. "You claim my heart, Evelyn, and you saved my life." "No," she'd correct, resting her head on his shoulder. "We saved each other." And that was the truest thing either of them ever said.